G'day guys, how are we going? Well, today I'm going to cover a topic that I get asked a fair bit about because on my mighty ZD30, my 3 litre Patrol, because I've got the upgraded intercooler, so the larger intercooler, and underneath it's a temperature controlled thermofan under there as well. And then down in here I've gone with a stage 2 turbo upgrade and then couple that up with the performance tune on this engine. Now this is a really nice vehicle to drive now with this combination going on. So people often ask, what sort of numbers I'm getting from my exhaust gas temperature readings, my EGTs, and also my turbo boost pressure readings, what sort of numbers I'm getting from those. So I've got a couple of gauges there on the pillar pod inside. So as I'm heading away on this trip, which I'm about to head away, I'll show you the numbers that I'm getting up and down the highway and how I go about driving my vehicle, especially in hilly country, which I'll show you that on the trip back, how I go about driving this vehicle through some of that hilly country with gear selections and all that sort of stuff. Now, pretty much these days, a lot of vehicles have got intercooler and turbos mounted to them. So there's a couple of checks that you guys can make just before you head away is make sure the hose clamps on those hoses there, because I've got one hose here that comes out the bottom of the intercooler and goes into the top of my turbo. And then over that side over there, I've got another hose that comes out of the bottom intercooler there with a couple of hose clamps on that. So you just need a couple of tools. You don't need much. Just a little extension arm to help you get in there, or a shorter extension arm with a little socket and just a little ratchet there to tighten up those hose clamps and make sure that they're not over tight. You don't want to, depending on what sort of clamp you've got, I suppose, but you don't want to over tighten these clamps. If you over tighten them and strip them, well then you're in all sorts of drums there if you go and strip them. So make sure they're just firm, nice and firm around the outlets there on top of the hoses, and also check the hoses as well. Make sure they're not cracked and perished, because the last thing you don't want any air leaks or anything going on with this sort of combination. So, and if you check those, make sure the hoses are firm and your hoses don't have any cracks in them. Well, then you give you both your intercooler and your turbo its best opportunity to perform at the jobs that it's meant to do. So I'm just about to head away, so let's get going and I'll show you some numbers that I get out of my mighty ZD30, good old 3 litre Patrol. Let's get into it. Here we go. So I'll show you the numbers and from the boost pressure readings and my exhaust gas temperature readings when I get out here, when I get on doing that 100k an hour, and I'll show you the ranges I'm getting there. But before we get to that sort of range, when I reduced a lot of weight out of the back of the Patrol, for those of you who may have been following and watched all that sort of stuff going on, where I pulled about 300 kilo out of the back of the Patrol, well, my exhaust gas temperatures, they dropped by about 40 to 50 degrees at 100k an hour just by removing the weight. So it just goes to show the impact and the effect that having a lot of weight in your full drive does have on your engine. And so yeah, I was quite surprised with how much the EGTs dropped that first time I drove it, just by removing all of that weight out of the back of it. So we'll get up here and we'll show you some numbers what we're getting out of this 100k an hour zone. So we're sitting now at about 98. I've just accelerated up, so we'll let it back off a bit, get down to where it needs to be. So here we are, so cruising now about 98k an hour. EGT's now sitting around 300 degrees, whereas before, this sort of speed, they were sort of around that 350 to 360 mark at 100k an hour with all the extra weight in it. And then even prior to that again, before I did the performance tune, all that sort of stuff, I had a chip in it at that stage, and performance chip, and to punch 300, 600 degrees back then was not difficult at all, whereas now it's quite difficult even to get sort of mid 400s, which is, they're the numbers that you want to be. You want your EGTs to be as low as you possibly can, and like here we are now cruising, about 98k an hour, EGT sitting there at 300 degrees. Boost pressures anywhere from sort of 9 psi to 10 psi. Really nice numbers, really safe numbers. It's just cruising along absolutely beautifully, and just seems to work really, really well out here on the highway. And one thing I sort of use that especially the boost pressure gauge, I certainly use that sort of to help me with controlling a bit of my fuel economy. Because every time you take my foot off like I've just done then, and then put my foot back into it again. Every time you take your foot off, that boost pressure number, they drop down a little bit. So I know now where to drive this, where I get it on the really on that fine line of still holding speed, but getting that the fuel range just right by watching that boost pressure gauge. So here we're sitting now sort of around that 10. And if I go and accelerate, put the foot into it, well, there it goes up sort of 18, 19 PSI. EGTs climb a little bit with it. Take my foot back off again, get back to sort of that 98k an hour as cruising range. And now look at me, numbers are now 300 degrees, 10 PSI. Absolutely my go-to numbers. Now I'm only going to show you sort of the numbers, out here on the highway, sort of cruising along the highway. And when I come back from this trip later tomorrow, I'll show you what how I sort of drive this up through the hills. I've got some long, steep, winding sort of hills, and I'll show you how I sort of drive that with gear selection and monitoring those gauges. So with that sort of stuff. But when I come out through these windy stuff, I'm heading towards Dargo, so I'm going to come out through Dargo later on tomorrow. G'day guys, well here we are heading back out of Dargo now, and as I showed yesterday up the highway, the numbers I was getting for my boost pressure readings in my EGT readings, they're pretty good, nice and low as I cruise up the highway. But now I'm heading out through the hills here. As I mentioned, now I'm going to show you the numbers that I get when I'm driving out through the hills, and how I go about sort of driving it. Sometimes I'll change down a gear rather than push those numbers up way too high. So yeah, let's get into a few hills here and we'll show you what goes on. Now this one here is certainly probably one of the biggest sort of climbs as you head out of Dargo. As you can see, I'm sort of controlling what those numbers get up to. I do watch the EGT gauge and setting those boost pressure readings in these hills. And here we are now getting up over that sort of low to mid 400 range. Boost pressure around about 15 PSI, which is not too bad at the moment. But I just find rather than drive the foot into the floor and give it more power, which not necessarily is going to give you any more speed, and generally all that sometimes does is push those numbers up. So I like to try and keep that EGT gauge, the exhaust gas temperature readings there, down at sort of around that 400 mark. I don't sort of like to go much higher than that. And the boost pressure's sitting up there around 17. Look, you can certainly drive a lot more. As you can see, there's 20 PSI there, but I don't really need to go those sort of numbers. So if it starts to get a little bit too high, rather than keep driving that foot in the floor, I'd just much rather go back a gear. I'm currently sitting in 4th gear at the moment, and just backing it off a little bit. As you can see, the boost pressure reading numbers there dropping as I'm climbing up this hill. Rather than keep driving that foot into the floor, I'd sooner just get up there a little bit slower, take my time to get up there, and keep those numbers at a reasonable sort of level, where you're not putting too much stress on that motor. As you can see, we're coming up through sort of this twisty, windy sort of a section of the road, heading back out. Now you're watching those numbers there on the boost pressure readings and the EGT readings. Well, they're all governed by what my foot's doing on the accelerator. So every time my foot goes down, so up goes the boost pressure readings, and as soon as the foot comes off, down they come. So they're up and down, they fluctuate a lot. And so I just like to keep an eye on, keep a bit controlled, and where those readings don't get sort of way too high. Don't see any point in driving that foot flat to the floor just to get up a hill a little bit quicker or whatever. I'm currently sitting in 3rd gear at the moment, just cruising around through these bends, and I'm very happy with the numbers that I get with the setup that I've got with the bigger cooler, Stage 2 Terra upgrade, performance tune. Works an absolute treat. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one. Catch you later on. Hooroo.